What's going on, guys? So in today's video we are going to be installing coilovers on my brother's 97 Civic Coupe. So what we will be installing is some Skunk 2 Pro Series coilovers, and we're going to walk you through everything, how to preload them, how to adjust the height, set whatever height you want, and then install. So let's show you guys the merchandise. So what we have here are the Skunk 2 Pro Series Pro S2s.
Yeah, 8 kilogram front, 8 kilogram rear.
What was that?
8K front spring, 8K rear spring.
So 8K, basically 8K means the spring rate and how stiff the spring is. The bigger the number, the stiffer the spring is. So these are a good medium, not too soft, but not super hard spring rate. Normally with the Civics, you get them at like 8K front, 6K rear. Depending on the stuff you do, you normally kind of want the rear stiffer than the front, whether it's drag racing or autocross and stuff like that.
Or if you have aero, if you aero load the car, depending on how much aero you have front to rear, you'd want to do the spring rate that way. Like sometimes you'll see 12K rear, 10K front, because you have a giant wing on the back.
Yeah, so it averages out basically.
Or if you have slicks, it'll even get greater, like whatever G loads you're pulling, it'll get greater.
So we're gonna get the rest of these unboxed, and we're gonna show you how to preload these. Some coilovers do come preloaded already. Preload means the amount of, basically this collar here, how much it compresses the spring at full extent, basically.
And they're independent, so if you want to do ride height, you can just lower these or raise the bottom half of the coilover.
And preload stays the same.
And
So
preload stays the same.
we'll show you that now. All right, so these are your Skunk 2 spanner wrenches that come with your coilovers. So what you're gonna wanna do is, first thing you do, you're gonna want to, one smaller than the other for these, and then the big one is for this. So you take your smaller one, and you wanna break this loose. You just loosen that up. And then you should be able to do this by hand. So you take this, and this is just to re-preload them. It feels like they're preloaded already. Yeah, it feels like they're pretty good preloaded. So we'll just set the preload with this one to show you. But you loosen it all the way up, and you go until it touches the spring. And then you tighten this one up until it touches this one. And normally what they say is you spin this one, you tighten this until you can fit one of these spanner wrenches in between the two. So we're gonna tighten this up. These are actually pretty thick spanner wrenches, so normally they're pretty thin. So spin this, and it feels like it's setting it right back to where it was. And you go till you can fit the spanner wrench right in between. And then you spin this one back up, like this. And then you hold this one so it keeps that from spinning. Then you put this one on here like this, and you give her a good tighten. And just like that, now your preload is set. But like I said, it seems like these Skunk 2s come preloaded, so we're not gonna do that with the rest of them. I just did that to show you. Now also adjusting the height with these, once again, once they're in the car, all you have to do is this lower fork. You loosen the lower fork, and then you take the small spanner, and crack this loose like that. And then the bottom spins independent from the top. So you can adjust up or down however you want in the car on the fly. Sometimes if you get the fancy top hats, which are pillow ball mount, the top hat will spin independently. So then you can just loosen this and actually spin the coilover itself, and that'll adjust the height. But with these, you have to do this from the bottom. So we're gonna leave this loose because we don't know where we need to set these at compared to the other ones, because the other ones are blown.
If anything, we can take out one of them and measure against it and get like the general area of where we want to be.
The only issue with that is those struts are blown.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Not gonna be 1-to-1.
So yeah, that's adjusting height. The rears might be a little harder because this part goes into the lower control arm. So you would probably have to drop the lower control arm a little bit to adjust it, but you should be fine. Like we just said, take out whatever your old stuff is and then compare it height-wise, and that'll get you in a ballpark range of where you want to be height-wise. Stop. So first thing you're going to want to do, obviously, remove all your wheels.
Will be replaced here.
Alright, so now that we have the wheels off, next thing you're going to want to do, there's a 14mm bolt here, and then you have the 17s right here. This is a 17 nut and bolt, so you're going to want a wrench and a impact, or 2 wrenches, whatever it takes, but to get this out. And you're going to pull this fork out. So this is going to drop down, and then you should be able to slide the fork over one way, and that's all you need to do down here for the front suspension. And then up top, you'll get this bolt, or this nut, and the following nut right there. And then the whole strut will come out. And that's all you have to do on the front. So literally, if you're on jack and jack stands and no power tools, it should take you no more than about 30 minutes to get the front suspension in. So we're gonna go ahead and start disassembling that now. Now we've got our fork loose, once you get your bolts out. And normally you can just kind of push the spring out of the way, or the shock, and you can slide this back. So now this is completely free, and the only thing it's held in by is the upper bolt, upper nut. All right, now for the rears are really simple. We're gonna be doing new camber kits for the rear anyway, and I'll show you those in a second. But basically you'll unbolt those 2 bolts back there. That way the whole assembly will come out. And then you loosen the bottom bolt here, and the nut, I don't know if you can see it, focus, there's the nut, and you pull that bolt out, and then this whole assembly should be able to drop enough to get this out and over. And then from the trunk, you will be getting the 2 bolts. Now I know I'm gonna put in the title, this is for a 96 to 2000 Civic, but realistically, anything from 88 to 2000 Civic wise, so EF, EG, EK should all be the same as far as installation and removal goes. There's slight differences in stupid stuff like the rear control arms, the rear lower control arms, where the coilover sits, this bottom fork is wider on EKs, I believe, and it's narrower on EGs and DC Integras. This will also work for Integras as well because it's basically the same chassis. We got all the old coilovers and struts out. So now we're going to take, you can see they're just destroyed. I'm gonna take this and try to match the new coilovers up as much as possible. Obviously this isn't compressed, but if you look at this, you know this is blown because you can push that down all on your own. So we're gonna try to match the new coilovers to this height with it compressed, and we'll see where it goes from there. We took this tape measure and we basically measured from the bottom of this collar to the top of this collar, and we figured a good base height would be 2 and 1/8 is what we decided on. So we set these at 2 and 1/8. We're gonna set the rears here in a second once we get the fronts installed. I already have one in. You just slide them in. It's better with 2 people, but it is possible if you're doing it alone. But literally slide it in and use your other hand and get the nuts on. So we're gonna slide the other one in and then put that together, and then we're gonna work on the rear. All right, so we got this rear one all the way in. As you can see here, the kit, I'm guessing these coilovers are made for whatever they need to go on, and then they include these washers because if you remember earlier I said that the forks on the rear are slightly different. On the EKs they're wider, so, or on the EGs they're wider, and the EKs they're narrow. So I'm guessing they're made to fit the EGs, and then they include these washers that go on either side here on the inside to take up the gap. And unfortunately, the last people who put coilovers on this put just a through bolt, so it wasn't the same. So we actually had to go and get our own bolt and washer. These are the washers that are going to, that they send you to take up the space. So we're gonna put the rear in now. The rear up top is already bolted in. So literally you just slide these in here and then slide the bolt through, and then you slide the other one through, and then you bolt it all down. All right, so now we're on to the front. What you're gonna wanna do is what I found is easiest. You get your through bolt for the bottom, and you get the fork and you line everything up. You put your through bolt in the bottom. Lift it up.
Right, yeah, I know. Come on. I literally just did this, yeah.
Go ahead, push it through. Push it all the way through. So you get your through bolt in the bottom. That way it's lined up, because otherwise once you put it on the coilover, it makes it a pain to align the bottom through bolt. Yeah. So you put the bottom through bolt in, and then now you take the fork, push down on the coil, push down. The coilover needs to go in. What's stopping the coilover from going in? That's stopping the coilover from going in. It's to hold the brake line on certain cars. Like I said, they're made for everything. So Shay just pointed it out, but these eyelets here, these are actually for the brake lines. Like some of them attach here on the spindle, some attach to the coilover themselves. It just depends on the chassis. So those are there just optional if you need them. Obviously we don't need them because the brake lines here attach to the spindle. So now that we got the bottom through bolt in, I'm gonna push the coilover in and lift the spindle up. Where'd you put the bolt? This is probably going to be a two-man job unless you have a jack. But you get it lifted up, and then you put your 14mm back in here. Like that. And while you have somebody lifting up, you go ahead and lift up more. You basically want no gap in between the fork and the strut here. See, if you let it down a little bit. You see how the gap opens up? Now push all the way up. That's where you want it, right there. Go ahead and you tighten this down to where it doesn't move anymore. Now we got the wheels all on, so we're gonna bring her down now, and we're gonna see how she sits off rip. Now, if you guys remember, I said we put the front at 2 1/8 of height in between the lower collar and the upper collar, and the rear, the overall length, we went 17.5 inches, which was from the top pat to the center of the bottom bolt hole. So let's see how she sits. Not a bad height considering how dumped it was. Yeah. And they'll settle too after you drive.
Yeah, it'll settle down to like right there, like a 1/4 of an inch.
Let's see. I think that's a real decent gap. What do you want to do? Bring the front down? Or leave it?
Let it drive for a little bit. Let it settle down. Honestly, now it needs camera.
Well, once it drives, it'll center or readjust itself.
Yeah.
Actually, it probably does need camber because it was so low, and the camber kits, the front camera kits were adjusted all the way out.
Yeah.
So we could probably adjust the camera kits in.